dying to get to that fit history, so let's get this started, and I will do my absolute best to have you out of here by 3 o'clock. And now you do seem rather comfortable. That's not close enough, is it? Can you hear me? Can you hear me just fine? Good. All right. You do seem rather comfortable, and I know you're sitting with people you know, and there's a lot of concentration of blue over here. So I'm going to ask you to do me a favor and sit at a table with no one that works or works for the same school as you. So up you get, move around, get to a table. Just when you sit back down, make sure there's no one at the same table that works at your school. And the blue has to be dispersed. That beautiful LSSU blue should be well dispersed around the room, please. Good to see you. All right. Looks like we've mixed it up a little. Hopefully your blood's flowing. You're ready for 45 minutes of intense learning. And hopefully you'll learn a lot from each other, as much as you do from me. Ralph, you manage all the schools, right? So where are you going to go? All right. All right. Good. And at the end of the session, I will give you one more reason that I wanted you to make this move. I wanted you to get up and move around and get a little bit, get your blood flowing, but there's a very important reason I want you to spend some time and talk to the others at your table as well, and we'll come back to that. So, I'm Mark Weinberg. I'm going to be presenting on this topic. I also do want to let you know that there are 6 schools amongst you that are also leading the way to excellence. If you are from Advanced Technology Academy, can you put your hand up? There's one. All right, a couple there. From American International Academy. Yep, oh, great, Ralph. You only get to put your hand up once, Ralph. Bay City Academy. You got someone from Bay City, great. Concord Boyne. And Grand Traverse. Anyone from Grand Traverse here? She was. All right, and Regent Park Scholars. Wonderful. So those 6 schools have actually piloted this system called Elevate 360, the main reason I'm here to speak to you. And their data is loaded, and I've been looking at it, and those 6 schools I'd like to meet with at some time, both online and in person, if you like, still this afternoon, to talk about what I've seen and what I'm seeing so I can help you through that. So those are your leaders amongst you, but LSSU made the commitment to pilot this system with a group of schools that are going through the mid-year review. And I think once all of you see what's involved, you'll be excited to get on board as well. But we don't get right there. We don't get right to it. I have to tell you what my objectives are, and you can see those up there, because it's going to take us a little bit to get to Elevate 360. I need you to help me agree on something. And you've all got the presentations in your packet, so you can see what I want you to help me agree on. Standardized tests matter. But I have to tell you a bit of history first, and why I put up this slide here. I was a school leader within a system for a number of years where tests, ongoing frequent assessment of students, was very important, and I embraced that. And I loved it. I loved the information I got, and I spent a lot of time with assessments. Then I went and worked for an authorizer for 10 years, and my primary role there was working with student assessment, one of my main roles. And over the first few years, I got a bit of the reputation as the test guy, the guy who talked about tests a lot. And that's okay, because I do feel frequent monitoring of student progress using all kinds of good tools is important. But I also know there's a whole lot more to education than assessment. And so I don't like being the test guy, I have to admit that. This was my first job. I was lucky enough to teach in that house right there, the one you see, the bright one, and I lived right behind it. And I woke up in the mornings and I looked at that view. And that was a school up in the Swiss Alps where tests don't matter, standardized or otherwise. They've been around for over 100 years, and they provide a tremendous education. But they're a little island of idealism. In the rest of the world, you can't live like that. I want to, just by the way, I'd like to go back and retire there one day. But in the meantime, this is our world. You've seen the headlines. If you haven't read that study, Credo study that came out this summer, I recommend it. It's something that will give you a lot of comfort knowing that charter schools in Michigan are being recognized nationally as doing tremendously well based on standardized tests. So, tests matter, standardized tests matter. It's not an either or. You can't say tests matter but. Tests matter, and all that other important work you do day in, day out in your schools matters as well. They both matter. We have to just understand that there's any number of reasons that we need the information we get from the assessments. Now, if we can agree on that, anybody want to push back, say, those standardized tests, they're a waste of time, we should be just teaching during that time? You don't want to say that in front of your authorizer, right? We could have that discussion, but I've spent so much time thinking and talking about it. I'm fully committed to using all the assessment tools at my disposal. And when I was a school leader, I loved it. I found standardized tests to be a challenge because they gave me the opportunity to demonstrate to the general public how well my teachers and my students were succeeding. And I recommend you embrace them in a similar manner. The other part of assessments and standardized tests is being literate enough, and what I call assessment literacy, embracing that and taking on it as a challenge if you're not yet assessment literate, because the world we live in requires us to use assessments, understand assessments, and speak about assessments. And what I'm going to get to is your role in communicating that to your board. So I'd like you to take a couple of minutes. This is in, there's a package that I included in your blue folders called Standards for Assessment Literacy for Building Leaders. And this comes from, I didn't make this up. This is one small portion of assessment literacy. But at your tables, show off to your colleagues what you know about any one of those. So just a little table talk, elbow talk. Look at those. Those are the statistical measures that are statistical terms that are used when we're talking about assessments. I'm sure everybody or someone at each table knows something about one of those terms. So I'd like you to turn around. We're going to take 2 minutes to show off to our colleagues how assessment literate we are. Leaders take the lead if there's others at your table who aren't school leaders.
It shows that there's a correlation where students, and they put it one thing
they're ready to take this test, this assessment website.
All right, I want you to wrap it up now if you can. It's great that there's good conversation going on. What I really wanted to demonstrate is that some of these may not be familiar to you, and if I made you feel uncomfortable, I apologize. I know that if somebody had given me that exercise when I first went into school leadership, I would not have been able to speak to a number of those items. And that's okay. I think that's unfortunately common. I know that I took a course at Michigan State University on assessment literacy, and there were myself and about 4 other people in the course who actually wanted to take the course, and then a number of grad students. And it was presented by 2 of the top folks in assessment literacy or assessment in the assessment field in the country, were the professors teaching the course. You could do it online. It was a great program, and they killed it after about a year because no one was interested. People weren't joining up. And even though these folks worked for MSU, they would bemoan MSU's program as not requiring assessment literacy of teachers and school leaders. And most programs don't. It's not unusual that people go into the classroom and go into school leadership positions and they're not assessment literate. As a school leader, I would recommend that you become assessment literate, that you're comfortable not with just that, but at least the standards that you read in this 4-page document that's in your folder, and that you use resources such as these. So Michigan Assessment Consortium is a tremendous resource to educators in the state. It's at no cost. They present webinars from some of the top people in the field on a regular basis. They put on conferences. There's resources on their website. And they really know what they're talking about, and they really care about using assessments appropriately within schools. So a great resource. We're very lucky to have it in Michigan. Another good book that a colleague of mine recommended. And then the final thing is anything written by James Popham. You might not agree with things that he says. I don't agree with a lot of things he says. But he really knows tests and assessment. And he was just, for the umpteenth time this week, named to the National Assessment Governing Board, which is the group in Washington that oversees what's called the NAEP. So, again, anything by him is good. Take a look at it. But if you don't become assessment literate, someone will trip you up along the way as a school leader. So please, please take this message. That's why I wanted to make part of it today about that. And then I'm going to even ask you, to affirm something. This is how strongly I feel about it. You don't have to really sign anything. But what I generally leave people with when I talk about student assessment is this. Purpose is everything. Know exactly why, everything from an exit ticket a teacher gives as a formative assessment to your MEEP test, to the plan or explore performance series, any of those. Know exactly the purpose of that assessment. Why is it used? What are you going to use the information for? And then be able to communicate that to teachers, parents, your authorizer, board members, anybody else who's interested. And I would really recommend reading Rick Stiggins' Assessment Manifesto. I wanted to have it printed up and put in your package. It used to be free. It's no longer free. So you have to go out and search it and steal it off the web somewhere or pay for it. But again, it's another very good resource about how assessment should be thought about and used in schools. It's not all about standardized testing. It's about balanced assessment systems. So again, a couple of resources, and something I'd strongly recommend you, a direction you take yourself if you're not already assessment literate. All right, here's another reason assessments matter. The educational goal in your charter contract. Is everybody intimately familiar with the performance goals that your school has in its contract with the authorizer, Lake Superior State University? I see heads nodding. If you're not, Schedule 7B, am I right? Do you know what one of the LSSU people here? 7.1, thank you. Schedule 7.1. Go back, look up 7.1, become really familiar with it. And if there's a term in that language, another reason to become that you're not familiar with, another good reason to become assessment literate, because that's what your authorizer is holding you accountable to in terms of your charter contract. And the general sense of all the goals in your charter contracts, although some are being updated as the years go along, is to prepare students academically for success in college, work, and life. So, can that be measured? I'm going to say yes. I'd love people to push back. We'd need an extra session this afternoon to have a great discussion about what it means to be college ready. We get that it's more than test scores. I just have to put that out front. There's tremendous resources out there to understand what career and college ready really entails, and a lot of people are learning that there's a lot more that you have to provide students, particularly students who've been put at risk, other than the academic preparation. If you haven't heard of the term GRIT, Google GRIT and a woman named Angela Duckworth and listen to her TED Talks, read her research, all kinds of excellent work done over the last 5 to 10 years on what it means to be college and career ready. Putting a number of those ideas aside for the moment, we also do know that test scores give us a lot of really good information. And that's what Elevate 360 is going to help us do. So, some of that research was done by one of the testing companies, and that often leads to people not trusting it. But I would encourage you to look at ACT's work, read about their organization, and if there's any testing company you're going to trust, ACT should be one of them. They did this research here, and what it essentially tells us is that we know that kids who start at a certain level in grade 8, taking a test called the Explorer test, generally follow a track. And this is what's called the college readiness track. So if they score a certain thing on the Explorer test at the end of high school, ACT also did the research to show that that score represents success in your first year credit-bearing courses. And then they can follow them back and see what does that look like starting in grade 8. They also know that students who start higher tend to continue that track upwards. And students who score below college ready tend to go off track. And there's some other graphs in other subjects. They go even further off track. So incredibly important, as soon as possible, to find out where students are so that you can intervene. Because that's what the other research says. If you intervene, you can make a difference. This isn't a fait accompli. This is not something that you just have to say, okay, if they're low achieving, they're never going to get anywhere. And if they're high achieving, we don't need to really do anything about it. We're just let them go. You can put interventions into place. This is just this I think based on approximately 300,000 students. I'd encourage you to look up the research on ACT's own website. But we know we can be fairly confident that a student who has a composite score of 21 at the end of high school, which also happens to be the national average, is ready to succeed in their first year of college. And we know that that also means that they'll generally graduate within 5 to 6 years of college at least, hopefully earlier. And we also know that the skills represented by that translate to other areas that they could go other than college and succeed in a career. Because in the 21st century workplace, the skills that are necessary to succeed in your first year of college translate well into the work you're doing in the workplace other than minimum wage jobs. None of us are in this role right now to prepare high school graduates for minimum wage jobs. They have to take them. I've got 2 kids doing summer jobs, and I get it. They're serving ice cream and digging ditches. You have to do that. But ultimately, when they graduate from our schools, we hope that they can earn more than a minimum wage job, and that's what that represents. So, with that said, the goal is to at least have students there by the end of high school, but you need to know that before you get there. And while I was working for an authorizer, Central Michigan University, we did some research to take these numbers that we got from ACT. And again, stop me if I'm doing some shorthand here. I'm assuming you all understand the Explorer test and the Plan test, and I don't need to talk about that. And the ACT test, of course. And you all either administer the Performance Series test or the NWEA test. So I'm not going to spend time discussing what those tests are. What we did was we did some research that showed you could take these numbers from ACT and backward map all the way to the spring of grade 2 and get a good, reliable sense of where students needed to be on track towards college ready. So great. Now we know that, what do we do about it, right? First thing is make sure everybody has the same information. And so we developed a tool to take in the test scores and produce graphs, and that's called Elevate 360, and I'm going to be taking you through that tool. What you won't learn today is how to use it instructionally to make a difference in your classroom. There's lots of work that can be done on that, and I know LSSU wants to work with you as you move forward to put your assessment results to better use. What we're talking about today is the top level of those results and how they relate to your charter contract. You have in your packets another sheet of paper, Elevate 360, it says on one side, and it has a shorthand description of something called effect size on the other. I'd ask you to take, till 22, about just 2 minutes, just scan it. Please scan this. It should be easy to scan because it repeats a lot of what I just said on the Elevate 360 side. Take a look at both sides, please. Now that you've taken a look at that, one of the things we have time for is to quickly look. It says at the top that it's a web-based tool. So those of you that are using it right now, the 6 schools I mentioned, they uploaded data to a secure site that we use, and we uploaded the data to a web-based tool. The rest of you that are not using it yet, I don't want you to be scared of it. It's very easy to use. I've just left a link in here for this, and you can see it looks like that. It's a very simple tool to which you log in, and it has step-by-step guides in terms of how to use the tool. And then you would have, at your level, these are the 6 schools I mentioned, you would see your own school only, while the authorizer would see all the schools. And then once data is loaded, essentially what you do is you explore your results. Now, to protect the innocent, I'm not going to put each individual school's results up, but we can look at those later, just so you know they're there and we can talk about them, maybe even on the cruise. We'll see. This explains much of what I said on the front side, what you just read. On the back side, it explains a metric called effect size. Again, another good reason to be assessment literate is to understand what effect size means and why it was used. It is, as it says up there, one of the most commonly used indices of the impact of school-level factors on student achievement. That's important, right? You run schools, you want to have an impact on student achievement. In order to look at that in the fairest and most acceptable way for high-stakes purposes is to use a metric like effect size. As difficult as it is to understand when you first approach effect size, I'd ask you to embrace it and understand it and work with it. When I first saw it, I was like, oh, really? we have to use effect size. I learned about it. I saw where it's being used. I understand how it can really be useful to both schools, leaders, the boards, and the authorizers. So, without doing a lesson on effect size, we're going to keep moving. Now, there are a few board members in the room, correct? Board members? Are there board members here today? No board members at all? Oh, okay. Good. What I want you to know is that I came in June and I spoke to your board members. There was a board retreat right in the same place. We were speaking in the same room, and I did this presentation for your board members. And I'm going to give you a few slides. It gives you shorthand. I don't want you to be without information that they already have. So, charter school law changed in Michigan in 2012. And it said that up top. It's amazing to me that that wasn't always there. But prior to 2012, authorizers didn't have the guidance that said the achievement for all groups of pupils is the most important factor in your decisions about charter school authorization. It now says that in that language. So extremely important to know it. Your boards need to know it, that that's how Lake Superior State University is going to make its decisions, using student achievement for all groups of pupils as the most important factor. And then below that is what your charter says. So I went over that. Then I gave a suggestion as to how boards run their meetings. So if you find your boards demanding that you spend more time talking about student achievement, my fault. I do think board meetings should be focused at least 33% of their time on issues related to student achievement. And so I hope your boards follow up on that. And I would encourage you to encourage them to talk about that. Because often they don't get it. Maybe they don't want to hear it. Maybe the news isn't so good. Whatever the issue is, it's a best practice. So then I talked to them about, what questions should they ask as they're talking about student achievement? Well, go back to the contract. Talk about your educational goals. Growth, individual gains, relative performance. So those are questions. And mission-specific goals where they exist. I also made this recommendation about when they should ask the questions. I made sure I said it was just a sample. It's in your package. I'm going to guess that most boards won't act on this. I would encourage you to act on it. And as you plan to present at your monthly board meetings, have this stuff ready. Be ahead of the game. So, what do we got for August? State and federal accountability. MME scores are coming out publicly. The accreditation system that's being implemented, the top to bottom list, that's all coming out right about now, next week or two. Get ahead of the game, be ready to talk about it. Any questions on that stuff? Right, then we talked about, so we suggested what questions were good questions, when they should ask them, and then who they should ask them of. And I suggested that they think about triangulating the data they get. And this came from a very formative experience I had. I was working for an authorizer, and I went and visited a school, and I came prepared with data to discuss data. There was also someone else presenting at that board meeting ready to discuss data. Same assessments, essentially the same data, presented two very different pictures. Imagine what the board thought. Wait, these are the same scores, and you're presenting them this way and they're presenting them the other way. One way we look good, one way we don't look so good. And that was very formative. I will tell you that school no longer exists. And a lot of things, I would say things started rolling along at that meeting when they realized they were getting different sets of information. Ideally, when you triangulate, you get a great picture, and ideally the people presenting to you are showing you the same information with the same answers. Primary source is you, school leaders. You're the primary source of information for your leaders. A secondary source would be the reports they get either from the media, perhaps, when your MEEP scores go into the papers, or your authorizer. And I would say expert opinion is what we're doing with Elevate 360 and what LSSU has done. They've said, let's go to a third party. Let's be absolutely solid that the data we're all talking about that's so important, that's so high stakes, is good. So when I was talking about triangulation, this is what I was getting at. Has anybody had that experience where the MEP scores come out in the local papers and your board members start asking about them? Yeah? And sometimes, again, ideally you're well ahead of that. All right, this is what the tool looks like. This is a real school. I'm not doing this live, but essentially, let me try and explain it. You remember that curve that we looked at? It's on this piece of paper, this curve down here. Let's call that the trajectory towards college readiness. That's that curve there. And this is performance at each of the grade levels. Now, you can't see it from where you are probably, but what I selected was what I call the trajectory view. Grades 2 through 8, fall, reading, and it says newly enrolled. So one of the things that's put into this system is the Michigan Student Data System file. Your MSDS file is loaded in here, and one of the fields in Michigan Student Data System is date of enrollment. So we can connect your test scores to your Michigan Student Data System and figure out how long kids have been in your school, or not, if they're newly enrolled. That means they're brand new. So what this represents is essentially baseline data. How are your kids performing against college readiness before you've done anything to them? And I think what you see there, actually these aren't, to be honest, these aren't terrible. You see things much lower than that. You actually see 4 groups, 4 grade groupings, where they're, to some extent, with a small level of confidence, actually quite a bit higher here in grade 7, on trajectory. I won't go into too much detail, but you'll see on the website there's a little drop-down called Help Understanding These Charts, and it's got a nice key and so on. So again, time being limited, we're not going to go into details, but basically this dot represents the effect size of that group of students relative to college readiness, and each of the bars represents 2 times the standard error of the effect size. You really do want to know what that means if you don't. And that's why you need to become assessment literate. But essentially, when you've got 2 times the standard error on either side, between the top and the bottom, you're 95% confidence that achievement falls within that range. And another thing to talk to your boards about, to your teachers about, to your parents about, no test score, no group of test scores should ever be seen as a single point. Always talk about a range. We're humans. We're not perfect. Tests aren't perfect. Tests have error in them. Error's not bad, error's normal. And this is something you want to be able to talk about and why you look at a range. So that's baseline data. Not terrible, not so good, certainly a lot of work to be done. Now, when I change these and I put 2 through 8, and I should put the spring in there. I will put the spring. And 3+ years. Oh, I did it already. All right. I clicked it without trying to click it. I get a very different picture. And it represents larger groups of students in this particular school because they're retaining their students, not in the grade level, in the school. They're moving along. And this is mutually exclusive. So this group of students here does not include any of these students because you can't be enrolled for the first time in a school in the fall and then be counted in a group that's been there for 3 or more years in the spring. 2 completely different groups. So what this represents is that this school is getting it done, to be quite frank, relative to that goal of preparing students for college, work, and life as measured by the college readiness trajectory using Explorer, Plan, ACT, NWEA, and Performance Series. That was a long sentence. So there you go. The blue ones represent with 95% confidence that those grade levels, the students at that grade level, are performing at or above the college readiness level. And the other ones, you're not quite that certain, but yellow's just caution. Yellow's not bad. Yellow's okay. You just would want to be a little more cautious. Now, your schools are not authorized by grade level. Yeah?
Sorry, just to follow. What assessment are you looking at?
Oh, so this is, it doesn't even tell you there. That's a great question. What assessment? The reason effect size was used as a metric, it doesn't matter what assessment. It could be any one of them. Once you take your student achievement data and put it through the algorithm, the statistical model we built, you can compare any school with any grade levels, with any size, with any grade span, with any tests. And you're getting a picture of that school's effect on student achievement.
So we're not comparing anything,
Well,
we're weighting different assessments in this trajectory.
in this trajectory, you're looking at one school. Your authorizer is able to look at all schools equally. So that's what I'm getting at with the apples to apples.
Weighting a few different assessments for...
No, this is only, right now, so this would be only grades 2 through 8, and I happen to know this school uses the NWEA map. So this is the map. To answer your question, it's the map test in this picture. But the bigger idea was that it doesn't matter, that you're measured against a standard where an authorizer can make an apples-to-apples comparison of your achievement. But that is the map test. And then, if we had more time, we'd look at how the Explore and the Plan and the ACT look as well. All right. So the baseline, a lot of work to do. In this particular school, they're getting it done with kids who stick around. And I would also, there's a question back there.
So when you're looking at the ACT and NEET scores that are pulled, can it pull the state scores from the previous year if they weren't in your school? So compare where they were last year to now?
No. So the ACT scores, if we're talking about the grade 11 ACT, that comes from in the MME file. So the upload to the system is the MME file. You couldn't put an individual student's score in, no. You'd need a whole school's MME file to load. And you wouldn't take their old, you wouldn't take an MME from another school. All right. So effect size takes a score and it standardizes it. If that's, so what it, so there's a statistical calculation that is somewhat explained on the back of here. And it basically, if an effect size of +1, that's a good way to start, is equivalent to approximately the 84th percentile, if you're familiar with percentiles. And if you look at a population and you assume something called normal distribution, and a normal distribution looks like this. That's called the normal distribution. And a standard score, an effect size is called a standard score. A standard score of 1 is at the 84th percentile, which is right there. So that's the easiest way of looking at effect size, meaning that it's basically taking your achievement data and putting it on a standard scale. Now again, there are some things in there that I mentioned, and that's why I started off with assessment literacy. You need to understand measures of central tendency. You'll recall that was the first thing up. Mean, median, mode. That's important if you're looking at normal distribution. You need to understand mean, median, and mode. You need to understand variance. And you need to understand the other things that I had up there, because they relate to understanding normal distributions. And this is not just for effect size. It's really in terms of all the tests you look at. If you look at your MEP scores and you look at your results relative to the state, it's helpful to understand those issues. All right. So, what we've been talking about is achievement, a snapshot of kids in time, in either the fall or the spring, how they are doing relative to a standard. We've put a lot of emphasis on the idea that a school shouldn't be held accountable for that achievement until they have an impact on the students. And that's why we looked at the difference between newly enrolled and 3+. Those kids who've been there for 3 or more years, you could talk about why they're not hitting college readiness, but I think you'll find that LSU's position is there may be some reasons, but there's no excuses. And if they're not getting it done once they've been in your care for 3 or more years, then we need to have a conversation about what you're doing and why you're doing it. It's a pretty tough conversation, but think about kindergartners. They come in fresh. No one's had them in a public school yet. And you've got 3 years, the end of grade 2, to get them to grade level. Is there any reason a second grader, if you've had them since the beginning of kindergarten, shouldn't be doing reading and math at grade level? I don't see anybody saying yes. No, there's no reason. And I'd like to hear one. I haven't heard one yet. And then you just draw that out. What about kids at the end of middle school? If you've had them all the way since kindergarten or at least all through middle school, shouldn't they be ready for a rigorous high school curriculum at the end of middle school? If they came in midway through grade 8, that might be tough. But if you had them all for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and they were below grade level, yeah, it's tough, but that's your job to get them there. And the same thing at the end of high school. If they're not ready at the end of high school and you've had them for the whole of high school, you know, good conversation. So those are continuously enrolled students. It's also, of course, important to think about all students. And that's when you start to talk about growth. Because every student, not just continuously enrolled students, but every student from the day they enter your doors should be growing. And how much? How much should a student grow in 1 year?
140%.
140%. Do I hear 150? It's a bit of a trick question. I like that answer. That's a really good answer. Depends where the individual student is at. And as I'll show you, our tool takes that into account. I was taught when I first started asking or hearing about this question, how much is good enough? Everybody said, well, a year of learning for a year of instruction. And people actually, superintendents of public instruction talked about that. It was in goals at the state level. If you think about it, for the students you're serving, what does that do to a student that comes in 2 or 3 grade levels behind? They never get caught up, right. So you have to set a goal higher. This tool sets the goal at 70% of the gap between where they start in the spring and where college readiness, where they start in the fall and where college readiness is for them in the spring. That's complicated, and we're down to about 2 minutes. So I'm going to
So are you saying then growth is variable to the student? When you're saying that college readiness growth, is that point going to stay the same and really like the gap between the two?
The latter. So yes, it's about where they are now and where they've got to get to. And if they can close at least 70% of the gap each year, this is going to give you a green light. I will tell you that that is a high bar and good for most schools. It's not really a high bar for schools where the students are coming in college ready already. And we are, when I say we, the National Charter Schools Institute is actually this summer undertaking a project to vary that a little and change that growth algorithm. But at the minimum, you need to know if your students are below grade level, this is setting a high bar for growth. And it should be. Well, whether it's 140%, whether it's 70% of the gap, whether it's individualized by student, those are all really good discussions. And they're ongoing discussions. And this tool is currently in what we'll call the 1.0 stage. We just released it last June. We've had a number of authorizers using it, putting data in, and we're improving it as we go along. So the tool is about Elevate 360s measures achievement of continuously enrolled students and growth of all students. Those are really the two things you need to remember when you leave today about Elevate 360. How are students doing who stay with you, and how are all students growing toward that achievement benchmark we call college readiness? Now you've got to, once you leave here, you have to take it to your board members. My advice, be over-prepared, know your data better than anyone else. And call Fred or Chris or whoever if you need some help. And this comes from another presentation I did a few years ago when I was struggling a little bit because I hadn't presented to a board, my own board, in a while. And I knew these two gentlemen, and I knew they did their jobs really well in terms of communicating with their boards. Does anybody here know Fred Borowski? A few people know him. Very energetic school leader at Taylor International Academy. Anybody know Chris Plum? A few people again. Again, really good at what he does. And even though they're not in here, and I didn't even tell them I was going to show this slide, I guarantee you if you look up Chris Plum at Plymouth Educational Center or Fred at Taylor and say, I'm a charter school leader and I could use your advice or help, they're the kind of guys who would talk to you for the next hour about presenting to boards. Because that's the kind of people they are. So, and that's why I also wanted you to sit with someone else other than those who are at your school. Network, network, network. You can never lose from networking with people. It's going to help you. It's going to provide support when you need it. So get to know the people. You're going to get to know them on a cruise a little later in a slightly less formal setting, but don't undervalue the benefit of meeting these other school leaders while you're here. So that's it. I'm a couple minutes over time. I apologize. I know I went over this very quickly. The 6 schools that have their data in, I'd be happy to discuss with you at a future date. I do have one more announcement to make. I think school leadership is so important that today's my last day on the job with the National Charter Schools Institute. I've actually taken a job as a school leader, and we got our district code today, so we're starting up in the fall. And here's a plug. Here's an absolute shameless plug. I'm working as a school leader of an online academy. If any of your students need to enroll in an online academy, call Mark Weinberg. There you go.